in spite of all I've told you, God kept me up all night long one Saturday night in the early 70s and birthed a burden in my heart for real revival. That's the redeeming factor of the story. I wanted revival for my church, but I must admit to you guys painfully that I wanted it for the wrong motives. I wanted revival in my church because I knew it would make me look good. I didn't want it for the right motive. I also knew that when revival came, that I would be brought under some pressure that I wasn't willing to deal with. So I wasn't willing for the first wave of revival to sweep across my life. And yet, I thought I wanted revival for my people. But the burden was good. The burden was genuine. And I had some great mentors and learned the truth about real revival. And out of that study where a revival became the mantelpiece of my life, I became acquainted with the Life Action Ministries and invited them to come to our church to conduct a crusade, 3-week crusade. We put it on the calendar for February of 1995. And 1994 was unwinding and unraveling like I just described to you, with our marriage literally hanging on by a thread. And that thread getting thinner and thinner every day. I was an angry man. I wasn't willing to admit how angry I was. Anger, as we've learned today, and the double first cousin to bitterness. I was struggling with all of that and going on preaching every Sunday, acting like everything was all right. Finally dawned on me I couldn't let this team come to our church for a revival without telling them the truth. So I called them. I was talking to Don Averill, who was with the team then, told him what was happening. Don prayed for me over the telephone. Got together with Brother Byron, the leadership of the team, and they decided they wanted to come on in view of the fact that I told them that there was no immorality or infidelity going on between the two of us, either of us, neither of us guilty of that. I'll never forget Don telling me on the telephone, long distance from Michigan, said, Don, if you can hold on till we get there, you'll have some people around you who can help you. I began to cling to that word. It was a word of hope. I had lost all hope that things could ever be different or any better. They invited me in the meantime to come and join them. One of their teams conducting a crusade like they do in our church. And my wife initially did not want to go. I knew she didn't. By this time, she didn't want to go anywhere with me. When I confronted her with the opportunity for us to go out to Texas for a Life Action crusade before they came to our church in February, she was very, very resistant to the idea. The idea of going anywhere with me by this time was repugnant to her. But finally, she agreed. We went out to Texas. We checked into 2 separate motel rooms. A part of her criteria for being willing to go at all. In the Holiday Inn Express. I'm staying in the Holiday Inn Express this week. I love the place. I didn't love that first week. We were in 2 separate rooms. And we attended the worship service at the Birchman Baptist Church there where the Red Team was conducting the crusade. Wayne Davis was our counselor. Met with him every day. He loved me enough to tell me the truth. He held my feet to the fire. Challenged me if I'd begin to write a list out of the ways I'd wounded my wife over the years. I felt like I needed to do that, and I agreed to do that. And I began to work on that list, and it got longer and longer and longer until it was about 3 pages, single space, legal-size paper long, and it wasn't complete then. On Thursday night of that week, let me back up on the first night, my wife sitting beside me before church started, I said, honey, what's wrong? I could tell she's a little nervous. She said, Don, I won't get anything out of this if I have to sit by you. I said, I understand, honey, you do what you've got to do. So she got up, got her purse and her Bible, and went back across to the far side of the building. And it's as far away from me as she could get, and that's where she stayed, and me on this opposite end of the building for that whole time. And that's the way we were for a week on Thursday of that week. St. Clair preached on the word in Luke chapter 20. If you fall on that rock, the rock being Jesus, you'll be broken. But if the rock falls on you, you'll be ground to powder. I never heard a message like that anywhere under any circumstance. I never heard anybody preach on brokenness. The next morning, counseling with Wayne Davis, Wayne looked me in the face and said, Don, what's God saying to you during these days? I said, Wayne, that sermon last night, I never heard anything like that. God just riddled me, just drove me to the wall with overwhelming conviction. And I said, God spoke to me last night. Wayne knew that we were at a defining moment. He leaned over the table that separated us and put his finger gently in my face and said, Don Graham, you're at a crossroad in your life. You're either going to fall on that rock and be broken, or it's going to fall on you and grind you to powder. I knew that I'd heard the truth, but I didn't like what I'd heard. But I knew what I had to do. Wayne prayed and got up and left. So counseling sessions previously lasted nearly all day. It was over in less than 5 minutes. He was gone. He left me alone with God all day long. I knew what I had to do that night. When I went to the service, the Life Action people, as most of you know, give an invitation to go to, don't have an altar call like some of us Baptists do, but to go to a prayer room, get along with God when God speaks to you. Before the preacher came to preach, I got my list, my Bible, and went back to the prayer room, knelt down on the floor. There were other people there. I was oblivious to that. I just fell out on that floor. I opened up those papers, and I read from Psalm 139, Psalm 51, and other places, and cried out to God for help. Went down that long list of the ways I'd sinned against my wife and wounded her, and admitted to God that I had first of all sinned against him and hurting my wife as I had. And so I went down that list. It was a painful experience, guys. No way I could tell you it wasn't. It was very painful. I cannot explain to you. I don't have words to explain to you what happened to me. But when I confessed that last entry on that sheet of paper, everything that God had revealed to me, when I rose to my feet, I knew that my Heavenly Father had forgiven me. But I also knew that I had much ground to cover. I went out to the service. They were concluding the service. My wife and I got in the car, and on our way to our motel room, we stopped off to have supper. We'd not eaten anything that evening. I took my Bible and those sheets of paper with me into that dining hall. And after we had our meal together, I told my wife about my visit and what God had done with me in the prayer room there. She didn't even know I'd gone to the prayer room. I was the last person she was looking at, you know. And I began to go down that list and ask her one by one if she would forgive me for the ways I had wounded her over the years, went all the way back to courtship days. And when I began to do that, my wife, who has the gift of discernment, knew soon on that this was of God. It wasn't another one of her husband's ways to just try to get off the trap. She knew it was of God. And I'm happy to tell you that God gave her the grace of forgiveness. I'd confessed my sin to her, how I wounded her, and asked her to forgive me one by one. And she said, Don, I forgive you. When I finished, she opened up a list that she'd been working on by Wayne's encouragement, unbeknown to me. Wasn't near as long as mine, but it wasn't supposed to be. She asked me for forgiveness, and it was so easy to forgive her, having been forgiven of so much by her. I can't describe to you what happened in that public restaurant there in Fort Worth, Texas, February the 4th, 1995.
I think one of the easiest things to do is to be the great pretender, to pretend to be something that we're not. And I think that's what we were talking about earlier. What do we do? What do we do? You know, not everybody can go away for a week with their wife to a meeting like that. What's a person to do? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. There's people watching this, listening to this, who are living right where this pastor was living.
You don't have to be in the pastor and the ministry.
That's right.
Across the board.
Now, that's what I mean. You know, I think there's people that are living there in our churches, people who are Christians, and we're playing a game. How do we get there? How do we get there?